Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for joining Pump the Love, Diabetes Through an Intersectional Lens. My name is Rav, and I am a program facilitator with the Hope Connects program, and I work really closely with the diabetes clubs at universities. So thank you to Diabetes Awareness Society, Diabetes Link at U Windsor, TMU, and U of T for helping me kind of plan this event. It's something we like to do every February and March to kind of focus on that self-love, inner work kind of vibe when it comes to diabetes. So we'll start off with a land acknowledgement. Toronto is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. To learn more about the territory you live, learn, and work on, please visit native-land.ca. So just wanted to kind of touch base on some of the programming and resources DHF has. Firstly, we have our scholarship program. Our applications for the upcoming academic year closed last Monday. So we'll be reviewing those applications and announcing the winners later in the spring. Next, we have our Hope Connects peer support program. So if you want to apply to have a mentor or to be a mentor, you can apply directly on our website. Then we have our Pep Talks caregiver program, which is all about parents empowering parents, because I'm sure for those of us who live with diabetes, we know it can be kind of hard for our parents to let go and trust us when it comes to our independence in managing our diabetes as adults. And then we have our free transition resource hub, which has the student transition planner. It's a one-stop shop for all these kind of tips and tricks about how to manage post-secondary life, adult life with diabetes. We also have our food blog and our transition guide, which has all of this wonderful accommodation information for 191 schools across Canada. And what's great about the transition resources is that it's created by folks who have diabetes and have been through the post-secondary process for that same population. And our new programming is T1D Community Arts. So firstly, we have our T1 zine. Not sure how many people are familiar with the zine, but think of it as like a mini magazine that has it's like politically driven. It can be as kind of messy, as expressive as you want it to be. We have 2 editions out. So the first one came out last year, focusing on diabetes and stigma. And then we had a second edition come out around Valentine's Day around diabetes and support. Secondly, we have our Free to Be program, which is an in-person drama and creative arts program that's kind of guided to help folks ages 16 plus to navigate talking about their diabetes, because one of the great ways to be comfortable with your diagnosis and to talk to others about it is by starting with expressing yourself, obviously. And then lastly, we have our Greater Than T1D community blog, which is written by youth in our DHF community. And it's everything from talking about stigma or potentially being misdiagnosed to starting a business and using your diabetes as an inspiration. So I highly encourage you to check those resources out. Now, before we kind of go into the session overview, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what kind of inspired today's session. So today's call will focus on intersectionality, which is a term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1981. Intersectionality emphasizes how various social identities such as race, class, gender, sexuality, and so much more intersect and overlap, creating a unique experience of privilege and oppression. It highlights that individuals do not experience social issues in isolation. And one way that we can kind of be comfortable with talking about kind of our unique upbringing, the unique fabric that makes us us, is by getting together and talking to each other. Doesn't matter if they have diabetes or not, it's always really important to learn from one another. Diabetes affects different cultural groups and identities in Canada at varying rates. This is due to a number of factors such as socioeconomic status, education, and ethnicity. So people with lower incomes are more likely to struggle to afford their medications and supplies. They might lose wages because they have to go to appointments because they don't have enough sick days. For education, we know that health literacy is kind of a hot topic because a personal example, having parents who are immigrants, a lot of the resources available were in English, and there weren't translators present. So it's kind of a miracle that I'm still here with the broken English that they knew back when I was diagnosed. People of African, Arab, Asian, Hispanic, Indigenous, and South Asian descent are more likely to have diabetes. And then the ongoing effects of colonization continue to influence the health of Indigenous peoples. And we need to understand health as a whole. So whether it's looking at the social determinants of health, and more importantly, we need to remove the pressure and blame from the individual and minimizing placing blame on the individual for giving themselves diabetes, which is a narrative that I think a lot of us hear. And BIPOC folk are less likely to use diabetes technology. And there are a lot of factors that play into that, including limited access. And diabetes discrimination in healthcare can include bias, stigma, and unfair treatment. These can affect patients' emotional and physical health and their access to care. And we also know that discrimination in healthcare can apply to parents as well, in terms of how they manage like their child's diabetes. And today's speakers are talking about their own personal experiences and how it has impacted them in their own lives. We are not the spokespeople for our identities, as diabetes management looks different for everybody. Today's call is an opportunity to learn more about how diabetes impacts our identities, so please be respectful towards all comments and stories shared. Now I'm going to head into introducing our lovely hosts, and they will talk about our EDI committee and an upcoming training that we're launching. Then we'll introduce our speakers and we'll have a wonderful discussion with them. Then we can have a Q&A with everybody who's in the chat. And then lastly, a very important exit poll to see how you like today's event, how we can improve upon it, which kind of helps us shape future events. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to pass it off to Asta and Afreen.
Thanks so much, Rav. I just remember a couple of months ago, maybe, or even weeks, we were discussing like, what kind of topic should we talk about today? And I think we all really care so much about intersectionality because it affects us all. And I'll tell you a bit about myself and how that really affects me. So I was born in India and I lived in Kenya for a couple of years before I immigrated to Canada. So I feel like I had a lot of diverse experiences and also areas because when I immigrated, that's when I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at the age of 5. And kind of like Rav mentioned, like some of the resources, I felt like carb counting some of the food that I ate, like roti, it just wasn't available at that point. And we really had to kind of guess until we figured it out. And so I think for me, it's so meaningful to be part of this EDI committee because we can start to infuse some of those considerations into the programming that DHF does, or even the events like today. So I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you so much for that, Asta. Hello, everyone. My name is Afreen. I've had diabetes for like over 13, 14 years. I was diagnosed when I was 8, and joining the EDI committee has been so meaningful for me because I'm Punjabi, and like Asta said, a lot of times coming from a cultural background or like being an ethnic minority kind of affects the way I manage my diabetes or even the way my family kind of acknowledged my diabetes. There was often a lot of stigma attached to it, and being able to talk about intersectionality and kind of how our backgrounds affect our diabetes is really important in, advocating for those around us and being able to introduce new resources to kind of support the people that have diabetes or kind of informing the people who don't have diabetes to better understand our community. So we're really excited for you to kind of hear the discussions and hear everyone's experiences to kind of broaden your horizons on what diabetes can look like.
And we wanted to share with you something that we've been working on as our small but mighty committee. And we do really invite anyone here today to join us. But later this month, we'll be sending out the cultural competency training, which we've developed for the mentorship program that DHF offers. And this training was basically developed by us who have experience as mentors and based on our personal experiences and kind of the research that we were able to do. And given the limited research on EDI and diabetes, like we really couldn't find as much online. So we really encourage you, if you have any experience or any kind of feedback, or even if you have other supports and resources that you found, to really share those with us and join us in this mission.
And so kind of on the talk of like what we're doing in terms of our training to kind of like share with people like what cultural competency is and how to better integrate it into kind of diabetes and the Diabetes Hope Foundation. We kind of created 3 modules called Power and Privilege, Intersectionality, Biases and Baggage, and lastly, Systemic Issues in School, Work, and Environment. And so when you guys will be doing this training, I know those names kind of sound intimidating, but the modules are very fun. Like you'll hear us laughing throughout the recordings, and like we're always open to kind of talking about if anything seemed confusing, we can always clarify it for you. But after kind of going through the modules, you'll get a quiz, and then you'll get a certificate of completion.
Yeah, and if you're interested again in any of the work that we're doing, if you have ideas, then definitely contact Rav. If you could put your email in the chat, it's rav@diabeteshopefoundation.com. Yeah, we'd love to see you, even if it's just a meeting and you want to check it out.
Okay, so now we're gonna move forward and we're gonna invite our guests to kind of talk about their experiences. So first, we're gonna get Heather to introduce herself.
Everyone. So my name is Heather. I guess joined DHF after I got my scholarship in 2011. I was diagnosed when I was 11 years old, actually. So lots of 11s in my diabetes history, it turns out. Um, and yeah, I am Chinese and Korean, and so I guess is there anything I'm missing? Okay, I'll pass it back to you guys then.
We'll definitely ask you questions and dig deeper. But
Okay,
let's go to
perfect.
Amal next for just a quick introduction. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amal. I am first generation Somali Canadian, and I was diagnosed with type 1 when I was 8 years old. I joined DHF in 2013 when I won my scholarship, and since then, I've been able to work with these lovely folks and host a few events, and I'm excited to be here. I think it's going to be a lot of fun today.
Right. And then the next person we'll be inviting is Nargis.
Hi guys, I'm Nargis. I was diagnosed when I was 12 back in 2016. And I'm from Iran. So I know DHF from I go to U of T. So we have the diabetes link U of T chapter there, and we've done lots of events with DHF, and I'm really excited to get into the topics. Sorry if my voice is a little
No, you're perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you so much to the three of you for joining us and really being open to sharing your experiences. We have a couple questions and we'll just kind of throw them if anyone wants to start answering or if you want to go back and forth. It's really just a conversation. And again, if anyone wants to pop other questions in the chat, then we'll try to get them either in between or at the end. So our first question for you is, how has your cultural background shaped your approach to managing your diabetes? And I think the three of you represent such different identities, so it'd be great to hear from all of you.
I guess I can jump in first. I feel like my cultural identity, while like messier, because I'm definitely second gen, was equally shaped by like cultural background as well as religious background. So I remember when I was first diagnosed, people always joke that there are like two kinds of Koreans. They're the ones that are like smoking and then the ones that are going to church. And my grandparents, as first gen immigrants, definitely were very much the church going Koreans. And so a lot of the narrative I received was that this was like a test that I was getting and it was all part of God's will, which is not comforting at all to hear equally as a child or like for my parents who are like, oh no, this is such a big life change. And then I also got given a lot of weird supplements, the kind of stuff that you find in jars and some of those creepier looking shops where you're like, do not put that in your body. You don't know what that is. I got told that a lot of things would cure my diabetes. I'm sure we've all had a touch of that throughout history. Cinnamon, ginseng, like weird, obscure roots and stuff. And so I think that played a lot into it because there's such like a tradition of Chinese medicine and like Korean holistic remedies. I got a lot of weird things to like consume, to like make teas with, and none of it, in fact, does cure diabetes, just in case anyone was wondering.
You know, Heather, you speaking about this really comforts me because literally the day that I got diagnosed with diabetes, my dad was on his computer searching up current research efforts trying to cure type 1 diabetes. And my dad got all these Ayurvedic medications for me. He's giving them to my grandma too. And I used to think, I'm like, you guys don't really think this is going to work. And like you said, of course, nothing works. But it's really nice to hear that someone else went through that because I thought it was so crazy. My dad's like giving me a capsule of these green pills. I'm like, okay, I guess I'll eat them.
Yeah.
I can go next. My perspective was a little bit just really confused me. So my background is like I immigrated when I was 9, and before that, diabetes runs in my family. So my mom is type 1, and my cousin and my aunt, like all on my mom's side. Anyway, so all my life I was like told to kind of watch for diabetes symptoms. And I guess there was always like the if you're, going to the bathroom a lot, drinking a lot of water. If I was doing that, I would like really scare me. And then when I did get sick, I got sick when I moved to Canada later on. And I was just like scared to tell like my parents that I was like dealing with these like symptoms because I didn't want to like be have I didn't I don't know. I guess it's just from the belief that back home that it's a very catastrophic disease that is a really big deal. So now that you're sick, like what are you gonna do? That was kind of the thing that experience that my mom had, and I guess um I kind of had that as well. So there was a lot of like secrecy for me, like not telling a lot of people that I have diabetes, like my family back home not knowing. Um, so yeah, really shaming, you know? Um, but yeah, I also definitely relate to the whole like um sending me, oh, like drink a cup of like apple cider vinegar before your meals or like cinnamon, whatever. I definitely relate to that.
Thanks so much for sharing, Argus. And even in the chat, I can see, yeah, the holy water. It seems like there's just so many different ideas or approaches that people had. But I'm also interesting to see how the three of you really are kind of challenging that as well. So maybe Amal, if you want to finish up on this question for us.
Yeah, I identify as Black, Muslim, and female, so I feel like because we talked about intersectionality earlier, it's really relevant in terms of there's, the cultural side of just being Black, and then there's the religious side of being Muslim growing up. I didn't really feel shame of having diabetes. Like I was very talkative and extroverted, so because I was the only person in my family that had it, I use that kind of as an opportunity to educate folks because in the Black community, there's a high level of type 2 diabetes. And I do actually know a lot of people that have type 1 from when I was a kid. So I just used to go out of my way and just talk to folks about the difference of, what I should be doing versus what your grandma's doing. And in relation to Islam specifically, it is the month of Ramadan. So if anybody is fasting right now, kudos to you. We're not, I mean, I don't think we're supposed to fast with type 1, but I don't make the rules. And the reason why I bring that up is because every Ramadan, including now, folks always ask me, oh, how come you're not fasting? And what's the reason? And I'm just like explaining to folks, like, I'm not going to risk my health for my beliefs. You know what I mean? Health always comes first. So that's always been a huge conversation. I used to feel really left out when I was a kid because I'm just like, everybody's breaking fast and doing all this cool stuff, but I've just been eating burgers all day, you know? But now that I'm older, I found ways to be a part of it with my family and with my community. And yeah, I guess the theme of what I'm saying is just adapting and kind of learning to work with whichever side or whichever group, I'm dealing with at the moment.
Thank you for bringing that up, Amal, because I'm personally Muslim as well, and I really often like feel left out from that, and I personally have fasted a few times, not like every day, but I found like I personally had okay like blood sugars, I didn't drop, but my mom who's also diabetic, like she tried and she her blood sugar dropped, and there's that question like as soon as like your health and safety is on the line, nothing else matters. Like I think, if I don't know if any other participants here like can relate to that, but I think your health is just number one above all. So yeah.
Thank you so much for everyone's responses. That was very enlightening to kind of like hear how much our experiences differ and kind of like understanding, especially like how it affects you in terms of your relation to your identity. Like, for example, you guys talking about fasting and not always feeling included. It was really nice to hear about your experiences. So we'll move on to the next question. The next question is, how do you separate the feeling of shame from the reality of diabetes, especially when faced with challenges like blood sugar highs or lows in public?
I'm going to jump in again just because I remember seeing, so as like a long-time diabetic, let's just say, there's just like always so much content that gets put out. And if I'm being honest, the toxic content is my favorite content because I feel very seen and heard. And I remember at some point someone had said, like, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. And I was like, that is literally what diabetes is. You can do exactly the same thing. All of your settings, your ratios, your sensitivity factors are always the same, except the outcome is always different. Like you can eat the same thing every single day, outcome is sometimes different. And so I think it's comforting to see that because like it's nothing that you can control. And there are just so many things that are outside of your control. So like give yourself the grace to understand that what we do is basically a practice in insanity. And if you aren't giving yourself grace, you really will lean into the crazy. Also, just understanding that like numbers are data and not judgments. I know it's so easy to feel when you see like high or low blood sugars. Oh, I should have, could have, would have done something differently. But I think that's something that we've internalized because of like the narrative on what perfect diabetes is supposed to be and like how we're supposed to behave. But they really are just pieces of information so that you're better equipped to do what you need to do. And so, yeah, just like rock on and give yourself the grace is really a big part of it because like otherwise it will make you crazy.
I,
That was like the pep talk I needed to hear. Like, can we do a redo of that? No, I'm just kidding.
No, I totally agree because sometimes, like, especially with my pump settings, when I go in for appointments, I'll feel like, or I'll notice this like back and forth thing where, oh, in the nighttime, they're saying, okay, you're going low, let's lower your basal rate. Oh, next time I go in, oh, it seems like you're going high, let's raise your basal rate. Oh, you're going low again. And it's like every time, it's like, wait, guys, don't you see this? We're doing the same thing back and forth. There's clearly factors that are happening here that we just can't really address, which is definitely a little like scary knowing that there's so many things going on in our body that is affecting our blood sugar, and sometimes not being in control of that can be really demotivating because it's like, oh, like I want my blood sugars to be good, but it's just so hard to manage everything. So it's so nice to hear someone else say that.
But even like good and bad blood sugars, I always like use quotation marks because I don't know, like labeling them also I think might be bringing some of that shame. But I'll let like Amal or Nargis if you want to add to that conversation about like shame and high or low blood sugars.
I guess, yeah, Nargis, go ahead.
Okay. For me, it's something that I'm struggling with right now. Honestly, it's going low at work. Like, for example, right now, just like as a student, I'm working at Winners, and I find like I'm kind of when I'm moving around too much, I go low really fast, or I go high and I overcorrect, and it just gets bad. There's some points where I like obviously like my management is really understanding, and they're like, take all the time you need, go, eat something. But there's that like I know I shouldn't feel this, but it's just like kind of an I feel a bit embarrassed or like a bit nervous that like everyone is coming towards me telling me if I'm okay. And it's just it kind of puts me in the spotlight, which I don't always want. I wish that it was something that I could um quickly fix, but the truth is like if it goes low, I need at least like 15 minutes to come back. And um yeah, I like Kyla. Sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong. Like, thank you for saying that. Like, it's, I think now, like, as I'm getting older, like, with work coming in, school coming in, like all those things, it's just hard to manage, or it's hard to fit diabetes into your routine. So that's something that I personally struggle with, but yeah.
I think in regards to shame, there's two sides of it for me. There's the internal shame and the external shame, right? So the external shame is, folks seeing you, manage those highs and lows, symptoms of diabetes, and you kind of feeling a little bit self-conscious, like I don't want to be, just like Nargis said, the spotlight, and I don't want everybody to focus on me. And the way that I would cope through that as a kid was, I'm like, if you're gonna put the spotlight on me, then I guess it's the Amal show. Like I kind of embraced it, and I'm like trying to educate folks, and I was very vocal about that. Now that I'm older, I don't know if it's possible to kind of slip into being a little bit more introverted, so I struggle more with the external. But at the same time, I feel like it's all about having a balance. I think the most important part, and that's why I brought up the external versus internal, is how I feel about myself. Because um, somebody in the chat mentioned earlier, perfectionism, right? Like I constantly want my blood sugars to be a certain way. I want everything to be correct, but there's certain things that are completely out of our control. So, in terms of that, I'm just a lot kinder to myself. You know what I mean? Like, even if I'm not doing a good job, I tell myself I'm doing a good job because maybe that's all I could muster up that day. You know what I mean? And yeah, just kind of being positive and more focusing on yourself and how you feel about yourself versus what other people think, because people are always going to have something to say.
Thanks so much for sharing. And I think that ties nicely back to what Heather was saying earlier about the fact that it's data, right? And we're up to interpret it, but we have to be kinder to ourselves because it's a marathon, really. There's so many good comments on the chat that I'm reading here. A lot of people that are echoing what you all are saying about sort of feeling like a failure or like you could have done better, or how important it is to really be kind to yourself. Yeah, I think those 4 words are just so powerful. Be kind to yourself. Like if you take anything away from today, hopefully that's one of them.
And be patient with your body. As
Body.
the like today when I was low, I was like, okay, it was my mistake. I overcorrected. I went low. So be patient with it. It knows what it's doing most of the time. So I think being kind, being patient is really important.
Absolutely. And sort of transitioning to the next question, how can we foster a more open and supportive environment for people with diabetes, especially in relation to those feelings of shame that we might feel?
I think Nargis and Amal kind of touched on this a little bit, but it's like taking up the space that you're due. So, like, as an Asian woman, I will say there was part of my life where I definitely fell into like the model minority perfectionism, like mindset where I was like being different or taking up space isn't like something that I should be doing. Like, if I'm taking up too much space and I'm a bother to other people or I'm an inconvenience. And I think now, like, reframing that as I grow is a really big part of it. So, like, I'm taking up the space that I need because I am my own person and I am my own individual. But also, then it creates that narrative that, like, people will take up space and it's okay. So, I've also like paved the way for people who are going to come next who may not have that same like self-assuredness, that same like confidence to take up the space that they need, and that way like someone may not struggle as much to take up that space in the future. So it's really about like hopefully making a better space for people as they come through so that they don't have to struggle quite as hard or quite as much as I did.
I would love to share something as well around this. I know growing up, like, of course, I know all my family means well when I ever have like a low blood sugar or a high blood sugar, but sometimes I often felt like it came off as you're getting too much in my space. And something I expressed to my family was, let me draw the line so that way you guys know how much support I require. So definitely talking to your friends and family, letting them know that I always appreciate your support and I know it comes from a good place, but there are certain times where to me it's not coming off as support, it's coming off as like, I don't want to say annoying, but like kind of annoying. And this is something like I experienced with my cousins. A small story time, we had gone on a hike and always bring juice with you, and I don't know, I just forgot to bring juice and I had a really bad low and we were like 2 kilometers into the hike. no juice, nothing. And my cousin had to run back to the car. Luckily, she's a great runner. And during that moment, I felt so much shame and I felt so guilty. And my cousins were mad at me because they're like, Efren, you could have gotten really hurt. And after that day, I remember there was that constant nag of, did you bring your juice? Did you bring your juice? And I was like, guys, I appreciate it, but that was just like a one-time mistake. Like, I know how to manage my diabetes, and that kind of really stuck to me. And moments like that, even when you do make a mistake, it's okay, but people shouldn't hold you against it and think that that's just who you are. So definitely giving people the space to kind of, tell someone else, like, this is the support I require. If you can give it, great. And that's really about it.
I think the same goes for work as well. I think like there would be less I guess confusion at work because I personally relate like family, like they don't always know exactly what you need, so you have to like kind of communicate more with them. But I found like at work, for example, every time I start like a new job or if I'm like at a new event, whatever, um there's like if there's like a space for like, oh, are there any accommodations you need? I always say like, hey, I'm type 1, like it'd be great if there was like some juice or something around if I'm low or if I'm high, like just give me time to like fix it, whatever. I think just being upfront and not you know, shying down from like what you need. Most of the time, like people are very understanding.
I feel like it also starts with talking about it, which like everyone here is really doing, right? To foster that open and supportive environment, being vulnerable. So again, thank you so much to the three panelists. And Amal, if you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I think everybody kind of covered what I guess the gist of kind of fostering that support and what you need to do in terms of that. But one thing I wanted to add was sorry, I completely just had a brain fart. I'm gonna circle back. Yeah.
Sorry, just gonna jump in here and add one thing. I know like that if we make mistakes, there can be dire consequences, but we are human. And we act as our pancreas. And if you're someone like me, you have very few brain cells left. So we really are just doing our best. And mistakes are normal. Like there have been countless times where I have forgotten a juice, or I have to like delay the basal to save how little insulin I have left in my pump because I didn't pack accordingly for like a day trip. It happens. As long as, we call 911 when we have to, we'll be fine.
I do remember what I was gonna say. And the reason why I jumped in is because I think this is really important. In terms of like sharing our diabetes and talking about ourselves, I find that I received a lot of support from others when I also inquire about them too, right? So a way that I can do that, I know that there's a lot of different diseases and things that are happening in the world. So it is overwhelming, but autoimmune diseases kind of fall in, I feel like, a more manageable category. So I've met folks that have lupus or arthritis or cystic fibrosis, and I kind of be like, hey, we're autoimmune buddies, and kind of lower that guard where we can share stories and I can learn more about what they go through. They can learn about what I go through. And if we have a shared space like school or work or wherever, you guys can kind of silently look out for each other. So you know that there's somebody there with you that gets it, not necessarily to the level that we do, but they get that they might be going through something that they can't control, and they could be an ally or just even just a comfort.
Thank you so much for sharing your stories, everyone. Okay, we'll transition to the next question now. Were there any key moments or realizations that helped you accept and adapt to living with diabetes?
So I think mine was just like meeting other diabetics and realizing that everything that your endo or your doctors are telling you is the golden standard, but not actually what people experience. So it's kind of like when your doctor asks you, like, how many drinks are you having a week? Or are you exercising every day? And you're like, of course, like, and I only have like one drink, maybe a month. And then they know, like, everyone knows you're lying, just like when your dentist is like, floss more. Like, yes, I should probably check my blood sugar more. But I think realizing that most diabetics do not live that way. I remember talking to people about like the longest they had ever gone without testing their blood sugar. And this is pre CGM. So, like, you really are flying in the dark back then. And someone's like, yeah, I didn't test my blood sugar for a month. I just like did it based on vibes. And I was like, okay, so I've never gone that long. I may have gone like maybe most of a day without testing, or I tested twice that day. But I think it was just like the camaraderie with seeing people who weren't doing it perfectly, but were still like crushing it at their lives. And I was like, all right, so to be perfect is all subjective. And like, if you're doing your best, that is perfect.
I feel like I have to jump in with the whole like commercial, please do not try this at home type of thing, but I'll let you go ahead, Amal.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Heather was saying, just because it's kind of related to what I wanted to share, where it's like that golden standard. I wasn't aware when I was a kid. I was like, I just got to do what the doctors tell me, and that's that. And kind like when I got diagnosed, you know, when you kind of I've never broken a limb, but like when you break your arm when you're younger and you kind of feel special because you want everybody to sign your cast. That's the kind of energy I led through life. Like I'm like I have diabetes, I'm just gonna own it. But I always felt that internal like I know I'm not doing it up to the standard that I'm supposed to based off what the doctor is saying. And so I spoke to a social worker at a part of the endocrinology clinic that I was at the time, and she gave me a book, and it was a book about folks kind of talking about their own experiences. And my jaw hit the floor. That day, I was like, you know what, Amal, you're a superstar. Because I had no idea that folks were struggling just as much as I was. And I know it's not good to compare yourself to other people, but after reading certain entries of folks saying they didn't check their blood sugar for long periods of time, I'm like, I'm being so hard on myself, and I feel like what I'm doing is enough. So the aha moment was that book. I'd probably never read it again, but it was a good learning experience.
I think that ties really greatly to the idea of intersectionality, as in never compare yourself to other people, because there's this one thing that I saw on Instagram. And it's like that idea where you sometimes feel like you're behind in life or that you're behind someone. But if we kind of imagine us all as little dots, never think that someone's behind us because we have never taken the same path ever in life. Just because you're in the same program at school or in the same job line, there's so many factors around us that keep us on different paths. And so always remembering that comparing yourself is never the correct standard because what someone else is going through is drastically different than you. So what's good for you, what works for you is like the best measure.
Yeah, like I wanted to kind of tie in the idea that given our backgrounds and like which countries we're from and like what resources we have available to us, it'll vary like how we manage it. Like I'll use my own mom for example. Like she was diagnosed when she was like 24. It was like many years ago, almost 30 years now. At that time, like there was no CGMs. Like she was saying that she wasn't even using like proper, like they didn't have like pens. It was like bigger, like thicker ones. Anyways, and a lot like there was very little access to like test strips and everything. So she kind of guesstimated everything as well, and she was okay. Um, but it's just the idea that you do your best with whatever you got. Like I think we're you know in Canada now, like I consider myself really lucky to have access to a lot of these resources, but I also know like there are countries that barely have like insulin. Um, so like what do you do when you like don't have enough of the thing that keeps you alive? Like um it's really that was kind of like the you know, to answer the question, that was kind of my moment of saying like I am lucky enough to have access to these resources so that I can manage it better, because if I was back home, it would be a lot different. So.
Thanks so much again, everyone, for your insights. Rob, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, sorry. So I apologize to those who have heard this story before. My birthday's in March, and I turned 25 at the beginning of the pandemic. And so I lost my health insurance through my parents, and I was finishing my undergrad. So it was like a really fun time trying to figure out how I was going to afford my very expensive lifestyle of having diabetes during a pandemic. And so that was the moment for me where I was like, I need to get some stuff in order to figure out how I'm going to live my life. And so, shout out to my parents. They didn't want me to die. And so, they were willing to help me out, forever grateful for them. But it's always good to kind of just, plan ahead and look into what you have at home and what other programs are there to kind of help you get access to your supplies. And that time was really unique because I was like, oh, wow, things aren't that great in Canada. I learned at the time that like 25% of folks rationed their supplies due to how they could afford it or their limited access to it. But then, two things can be true at once, right? We kind of look at the world. There's access shortages everywhere. There's affordability crises everywhere. So, we really are on one team, and it's really hard, and we're just doing our best. So emphasizing that message again.
Thanks, Rob. I don't think anyone's complaining if we ever hear the same story from you twice, because there's always like new insights that you bring in. So, all right, we'll go to our next question, which is actually my favorite question because it has to do with food choices. And I think personally, I remember like there's always been stereotypes or different perceptions of food, right? But when I was first diagnosed and I walked into my clinic, it was like Trillium Health Partners, the Credit Value Hospital, like second floor. And we walk in and we see this kid eating this like nice glazed donut from Tim Hortons. And my family and I are like, whoa, like we're entering this new world, this new idea of, oh, actually we can perceive food differently. It's okay to have a glazed, donut from Tim's. And that became my like tradition. So every time I go for an endo appointment, I get a glazed donut, just remembering that kid. But my question is, what's one thing that you wish people understood about diabetes when it comes to food choices?
I think mine is like no matter what you eat, it doesn't matter. And I've affectionately called like type 1 diabetes the good kind because like it will always require insulin. Like there technically are lifestyle changes that would make everybody like more efficient humans, let's say. So like I could definitely afford to exercise more. Should I be pre-bolusing? Yes. But ultimately, like my diabetes will be affected by my ability to count carbs and then give myself the insulin required to do that and moderate my blood sugars. And whether I eat 30 grams of carbs with like a balanced protein and fibers or 30 grams in like nerd clusters, it's still 30 grams of carbs. And so I think that's one of those things that people really struggle with because, especially like North American society, with like the fad diets and all of the weird, like, assumptions about food. There are so many people who think there are good foods and bad foods. And I was like, there are no such thing as good things and bad foods. And as it relates to type 1 diabetes, it will not change the outcome. Like, I will still need a needle or I will still need to take insulin. It just changes the amount.
I totally want to build off of that. I definitely agree. I remember when I was younger, especially when like my parents would tell like my friends' parents, like, oh, by the way, Efreen, she has type 1 diabetes. There was one time it was Halloween or something, and we were all talking about how we're so excited to go trick-or-treating. And my friends' parents were like, oh, are you supposed to be eating chocolate? And I remember in my mind thinking, I'm like, are you supposed to be eating chocolate? Like, nobody should be eating chocolate, really. And kind of just understanding that like I totally agree with the idea, like, that no matter what it is, like the food we eat, we're still going to have to manage our diabetes in kind of a similar way. And that if there's something that I shouldn't be eating, it's not because of my diabetes, it's just because I'm a human. And it's the same thing for you. You probably shouldn't be eating it either. And that used to make me so furious because I'm like, yeah, we should all be doing a bunch of things that you're telling me specifically to do, which used to really bother me a lot. So I wish people really understood, especially kind of like the overlap people see between type 2 and type 1 diabetes. There was always so much confusion. Like either way, lifestyle factors is something that everyone has to work on, not just a specific group of people. So I really wish people knew that.
just because it came up in chat. I am fully aware that glycemic index and like fat content and fiber do influence the release of carbs. So I hope we I hope we know, like, I am not a medical professional, so I will repeat that. And like, yes, there definitely are different things that are going to affect everyone's blood sugars differently. And like, I think also you know your body best. So like if someone else is saying this is the perfect diabetes food, like it's amazing, it may not behave that way for you. Also, sugar-free gummies will make you poop yourself if you eat too many. Just a general PSA. So they're not always safe.
I just wanted to add, like, I've been like thinking, I always think this, like, how do we change people's perspectives? Because I think it comes down to the type of diabetes you have. Like, maybe type 2, like, um, maybe you want to watch like carbs, for example, because like if you have insulin resistance, like carbs kind of count into that. Maybe you don't want to eat that many carbs, sugar, um, stuff like that. But it's just so different for type ones. Like I can't tell you how many times I've said like, oh, hey, like I have type 1, and they're like, okay, so you like can't eat sugar? Like, no, like I can eat like a whole box of, whatever cookies. Obviously, like I wouldn't do that to myself because it takes too much like mental effort and like just a lot more it's a lot more work to count for it, but like it's not like you can't eat it. Um and I'm thinking like how do we like educate people more? Because there's so much information online and people are always scrolling and like reading through these different facts about diabetes, and it's like you can't get to everyone. So like what I personally do is just like everyone I meet, I take the time to fully like if like educate them or explain to them that like type 1s can eat that, and even type 2s. So like it's I don't know. What do you guys think? Like how can we really educate people more on this?
I totally agree. It really bugs me when people say, "Oh, you can't eat sugar." Actually, all of us need sugar to survive. Like that's literally the only thing our brain uses to
Your brain,
function.
yes.
We like literally need sugar to stay alive. But I totally agree. This kind of like builds on our like one of the things DHF wants to start is like a segment on health literacy and kind of learning how to do research of your own or even being able to understand like for example diabetes better. And so one of the things we're hoping to do is talk about like these key topics like why does our body need sugar? Why is it the only thing our brain uses? Or for example, kind of those like nitty-gritty topics in diabetes that we can share with other people, not even like people who have type 1 diabetes, but other people who may not or just want to learn more and kind of like sharing those resources and kind of diluting the, biased or negative narratives that exist on like social media and kind of presenting more factual information, even in like fun ways. And like, I really hope that that reaches a bigger audience so we can like, really influence people to do their research before they start spouting a lot of nonsense.
Just going to jump in here again. I have this aunt who love her, we share the same blood, respects. But she just says a lot of batshit crazy things when it comes to my management of diabetes. I remember one time I was running high for like a long period of time, like a couple hours. So I did not want to eat dinner with everyone else. Right. I had the nasty fruit breath. Like I just was not my vibe. And like she still had an issue with me like not wanting to eat, but she's always been someone to kind of comment on my portion sizes. So there will be some people who just don't get it. And as frustrating as it is, even if they tell you that you're going to have troubles getting married because no one will understand your diabetes, you unfortunately kind of have to learn to live with it. And you just maybe don't spend a lot of time with those people if you can. And that's an unfortunate reality. But at the same time, maybe she should just take her metformin on time. Like, I don't know. Like, you know, that's just my POV.
Oh, totally valid point. But even on the flip side, I think Kate said something here. If you do feel safe enough to go to those new areas and go out there and try and educate someone, then absolutely, like kudos to you. Because that definitely is going to change the world, but also we can't change everyone. I think remembering that is so important. And Rob, to your point about, the aunties who are always eyeing you when you're eating something, recognizing like everyone has such an like different relationship to food, right? Maybe she was feeling like, oh, like I'm a bad host because I didn't feed the kid at the dinner or something. Who knows, right?
I'd love to give her the benefit of the doubt. I won't, but it's okay for other people. I would, and also just I know we haven't touched on tech a lot, but like when people see your devices and they are very intrigued, I don't mind if people ask me questions, but like don't touch my pump. Don't take it off my person. And it's hard too, especially with those generational divides. Like if someone's grandma's gonna touch my pump, unfortunately, I can't cuss her out in the Lord's house. And I just have to, deal with that kind of trauma on my own and just laugh my way through it because it's
You're not on your own though. You can share it with us right
oh
here.
yeah, I shared it in the zine. It was great. Everyone contribute to the zine. If you have trauma, just dump it in. It's great.
It always like sucks, like, because with elders, you have to like be very careful, like what you're saying, but you also want to like, stand up for yourself and like tell others, or like don't do that, whatever. But you also don't want to offend, like especially in like big gatherings, it's
Yeah, I had
hard.
to find a lot of a lot of compassion for my parents because I used to get so angry at them, like, why don't you like defend me more or like stand on business? And they were like, but like it was hard for them, right? They didn't have the tools or the language to kind of talk about my diabetes in a way that others would comprehend. So like growing up, I'm almost 30 now. I've had diabetes since I was 2. Like I understand where my parents are coming from and I may not like certain outcomes, but I'm like, well, now when it comes to like, people my age or younger, I'm going to yap nonstop about diabetes and like change kind of how we perceive it.
Yeah. It's good because our generation coming in, growing up, like we're gonna have a lot, we're gonna have an easier time, talking to others, educating others. So I love that.
I think there is this sense, at least in like East Asian communities, and I'm sure other people can relate to this, of like filial piety too, where like you have this sense of like that you should be grateful and you should be giving back, and like there's this respect that's due to elders in the community, like your parents and everything, especially if like parts of those families have like sacrificed everything to immigrate to Canada to get you a better life. And so I think like usually when people, like, one of my pet peeves is when people, you tell them you're a type 1 diabetic, which is insulin dependent, which means you have an autoimmune disease that requires some kind of like insulin injection. They're like, oh, I could never. And I'm like, what do you mean you could never? Like, death was the other option, and I considered it for a heartbeat. But that's not really sass that you can give to like the people in your family or like their respected friends. So like when they're like, "Oh, you're so brave." And I was like, "No, I just didn't want to die." Like that's not really a narrative that you can perpetuate that same way. And so I think I struggle with that sometimes because I'm like in my truest self, like I'm a cranky person and I will clap back if I feel that you have overstepped your boundaries. And I think boundaries are important, but sometimes like with family, I think that boundary gets a little bit messier because there is this sense of like both belonging, but like that you owe them something as a part of you.
I love how you brought up clapbacks because I was thinking to myself, I'm the clapback queen. Like it's so easy to kind of throw out that, defensive like remark to somebody without any regard for like their feelings. You know what I mean? Just because what they're saying is so it sounds insane to you, but to them they thought it was just a simple question. And I think it brings me comfort that the fact that people police our food is a collective discomfort for all of us because I think that grinds my gears in a way that I can't even describe, right? So a funny thing that I kind of came up with that's not kind of disrespectful as a clapback is to tell folks like, hey, it's not like I'm allergic to sugar, you know what I mean? Or like a reverse statement saying like, oh, and when folks ask you, do you have any allergies? I'll say I'm allergic to sugar, haha, just give them something to think about, kind of to make them feel like the way you're treating me is foolish, and like what I'm saying is foolish without kind of being too disrespectful. So that kind of works for me sometimes. And also just in regards to food and stuff, I feel like technology has come a long way. Just like Rav, I'm also 30 years old. So when I was 8 and I was diagnosed, it was certain needles and certain medication, certain insulin at certain times of the day. There was no leeway to eat whatever I wanted or to eat a certain amount of carbs, because if I'm getting an injection at 9 a.m. and I'm not coming back home from school until 3, I'm kind of limited in terms of what I can snack on. So being in that limited diet, I feel like that affected me mentally, because anytime I would have access to something sweet, I would always indulge behind other people's backs. So instead of having 1 or 2 pieces of chocolate, I would just be like, okay, mom's not looking, just shove a whole handful in my mouth. And now that we have the tools, and we're in 2025, yeah, we made it. I just feel like the way that I manage that is eat what I want, wake up when it's lunch, right? Like if I eat what I want when I feel like it, then it stops me from indulging when I limit myself to not eating that. And I know Heather earlier brought up the nerd clusters, and that made me cry of laughter because I love that specific candy. But if I want to have 5 today, then that's better than me eating the whole bag from not because I didn't limit myself that time that I had that craving, you know? So yeah, it just kind of ties back to what we said earlier, being kind to yourself, and pick your battles, because it's not everyday education. It's not everyday defend yourself, you know? We're trying to have a good time too.
Thank you everyone for your responses. Okay, we have one final question left. Kind of related to the whole food choices type of thing, but how do you educate others about carb counting, especially when you're at social events or out to eat with people who may not be familiar with diabetes management?
Okay, I will fully cop to the fact that I am not great at carb counting. So I look at things and like Ross said it, like judge on vibes. So I'll look at something and I'll be like, oh, I think this is 30 grams. And then you look at the pack and it's like 62 grams of carbs. And I'm like, oh, I was so wrong here. Um, but thus far, it has treated me very well. And so I think diabetics over time do pick up some kind of spidey sense to be able to judge both like what carbs will actually be and how they're going to affect your blood sugar, especially if you're eating like not new foods all the time. There are occasions where like new sauces are secretly just like loaded with sugars, or like random foods that I thought were one thing are actually something else. Um, and those definitely do bad things to my body. But I think for the most part, it's using like the resources that are available. So yes, like the nutrition packages, but like MyFitnessPal, if you scan foods, like does have pretty rigorous like counts in there. And I think just like going with what you know too. Like you are going to be the best advocate, but the best knowledge source for how your body will react to different things. And you have lived with yourself the longest. So you know best. And I think just trusting yourself with that. There's a lot of times where people will be like, these are the perfect foods, or like, these are the things you should be eating, or like affectionately called superfoods and stuff. And I was like, I don't know who these were super for, but they weren't super for me. And so I think just like trusting yourself and like Amal said, like don't limit yourself to what you can eat. There is also like a huge um body of diabetics who do suffer from diabulimia, just because either like burnout happens and it's so easy to just run that high where like it doesn't feel like your body is quite shutting down, but it definitely is. And I think like also as it relates to the mental health space, like diabetics just have so much information about food because you need those as tools to succeed with diabetes, but it also then introduces you to all of the negative like talk and discourse that can come in about food. So I think really being mindful of that and being kind to yourself in those spaces to make sure that like you aren't vilifying the things you put in your body. Like you need it to live, and living is really the ultimate goal. So just like be mindful of that.
Like what you said about like there's like not like one great food, one bad food. It makes me almost wonder like maybe like we don't have to be like so focused on like necessarily educating others. It's more like look at your diet, look at what you're eating. If you're if you have type 1 yourself, and see like what works for you, because like maybe like, I don't know, like pasta doesn't like overly spike somebody, even like they can probably properly work with it, but somebody else can't. Like, because our bodies are just so different, and like it always reacts so differently to different foods. I think like it's really good to just like teach people to look out for patterns, and like, almost like be your own little dietitian, or like your diabetes clinic, and recognizing those patterns to see like, you know, how you can manage it better.
Um, oh, Amal, do you want to go?
No, it's okay. I was just gonna tell a quick story. I'd rather hear what you have to say.
On the like topic of like cultural competency, I wish like one thing I could say to my like healthcare providing team is like I feel like they make carb counting sound like it's such an easy task, which um it's definitely not. And it's really hard hearing that come from someone that doesn't have diabetes, because they're like, oh, half a cup of cooked rice versus uncooked rice, just measure da 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 this that. And I'm like, you guys try doing that for every single thing you eat for the rest of your life. Like, you guys are making it sound like it's so easy. And being South Asian, a lot of our foods are not like it's not like one portion of rice, one portion of chicken, one portion of salad. Like, no, there's like so many different vegetables, like this, that, like I couldn't even tell you. And especially going to family events where like someone else is making the food, you gotta be kidding. I'm not gonna ask them what they put in here. And kind of like that expectation that like our endocrinologists hold, that, oh, well, then maybe you should bring something that you can carb count, like bring your own chicken and rice. And I'm like, are you for real? Like, please be serious. And I guess this isn't really like how I would educate others, but kind of like I wish other people would understand that, yeah, carb counting, quote unquote, could be easy if you're eating like very simple food. But for a lot of ethnic people, that will never be the case. And sometimes it really is just impossible to do that consistently. And I wish I could tell other people like it is that hard sometimes.
I think carb counting is kind of like a superpower, just because there's not many times in my life now I need to do mental math. So I always tell myself, even though this is extra work, it kind of keeps my brain sharp, just to kind of hype myself up a bit. But yeah, I just had a specific story last night because I thought this was relevant to the question, where my sister made cinnamon buns from scratch, and I was so excited to eat it, just because nobody's ever made me cinnamon buns from scratch. Like, I'm like, I don't know how much carbs are in there. Like, I could see her preparing the frosting, and I just made the executive decision that like it's probably not best for me to eat this later on during the night, because I could have a very rocky sleep. But just like life does what life is supposed to do, my blood sugar ended up dropping later on during the night anyways. And so when I came upstairs to grab like a snack or something to eat, my sister's like, oh, perfect, you can eat the cinnamon bun now. And I made the adult executive decision that I will not be eating it because of what I told you guys earlier. I don't know how it's going to affect my blood sugar, but I'm going to have my typical sandwich, a glass of milk, because I know the exact amount of carbs in there. So I have the confidence to eat that specific thing and go to sleep knowing that I'm not going to be experiencing a roller coaster. And I ended up eating it today. So everybody wins in the equation. And in this specific story, I was grateful because my sister understood, because we talked a lot about education and stuff, but there's no better feeling of having a struggle and somebody just getting it. And I kind of just go through life by embracing those little moments, because I've kind of reached a point where like education is important, but it's not every day of education. Like, I don't always have energy to do that. So that was kind of a feel good moment for me.
I know they used to have these programs through hospitals where like people could wear insulin pumps and they were filled with saline. And so like I know they do this for starters too, but they would let like normies basically rent a pump, especially if they were siblings to type 1 diabetics, and they would go through like the exercise of carb counting and bolusing and everything. And it's never going to be exactly the same because their blood sugars will still be around 5 or 6 no matter what they do. But I think really articulating to someone and then having them like mimic what the mental load is to be a type 1 diabetic. So like, oh, did you remember to bolus or give yourself insulin? Oh, did you remember to test your blood sugar? Like, are you checking in? Like, what are you eating? How much are you eating? All of those things. I know that like after people have gone through the exercise and are actually cognizant of the mental load that like type 1 diabetics or type 2 diabetics carry in the management of like food, other influences like exercise, stress, sleep, water, and then like the other things that influence your life, people say it's mentally exhausting. And so I think just like making people conscious of that is super helpful. And then like if you add in weird like extra foods or new sauces or something that you didn't make, like I think it does sink in for a lot of people, and it's a great like educational tool. Like I don't think people always understand. They're like, oh, it should be so easy. You just have to do, like, you just have to keep your blood sugar straight. And, like, in theory, yes. But if 1,000 different things are influencing it and you have control over none of those things, how easy does that become?
Okay, cool. So before we head into like a Q&A, I'm just gonna launch the poll because your input is very valuable. So I'm just going to relaunch that. I for real wish though I could give my parents like a pump to just wear. Um, yeah. Or like even my siblings, like with wearing like traditional clothes, I get pockets put into everything. But still the outfit looks lopsided.
You know, I wonder if they ever do like surveys asking type 1 diabetics like what they think of like the pump designs, because that would be really beneficial. Like, hey, get our input because we're the ones using it.
Yeah. I wonder that too. Like, I almost want to like search.
I don't have like any specific answer to that, but I have an answer based off experience. I work in tech, and just in general, I'm really interested in tech. So I always used to keep up with what was FDA approved, because I'm like, one day they're gonna make me a pancreas, and then I'll never have to take insulin ever again. But when the Libra sensors CGMs first came out, I went to Abbott and I did like a test session with them. And what I took from the situation is the diabetics are consulted after the product is made, because once I went through the test experience, I even realized like the folks that I had interacted with throughout the process had little to no idea. They were kind of just part of the pharmaceutical business, right? So I think in general, if there's any way, you see something like that going on and you could sign yourself up and it doesn't cause you any harm, I advocate folks to do that. They typically pay or compensate if that's relevant. And yeah, maybe one day the world will allow the people that have the issue to be sitting at the table, because I doubt from my experience that there's many.
I think this is actually something that comes up a lot just because I'm in like the EDI space with like some of the work I do. And it's consultations are usually done after the fact for all groups. So for like racialized sensitivity, for like gender representation, as well as for like disability inclusion. And it is one of those things where they're trying to move away from that practice because it's usually like a 300% increase in like costing if you do it at the end versus if it's implemented at planning and like implementation. And that is one of those things where like you've likely heard of the curb cut effect, which is like making sure that the corner of curbs are lowered so that other people can actually access sidewalks. And that was like an experiment done at Berkeley where they're like, oh, this actually helped like mothers with strollers, people who have like motility issues. It wasn't just people who use like wheelchairs, but also people who are caned and like have struggles getting up onto sidewalks and stuff, small children who have short little legs and stuff like that. And so it was one of those things that helped everybody. And I think the world is moving more to that space to say, like, if it helps one group, it will likely help many groups. And the curb cut effect is becoming more prevalent, but it is something that many groups are still trying to advocate for, to say like, if you design it and it's shit at the beginning, it will probably still be shit at the end. And like the little bit of input we do isn't going to help us at the end.
Yeah, to Kate's point, I think it is because they need to finalize the products before folks with diabetes can use it, but I'm also not smart enough to fully answer that knowingly. Are there any other questions or comments? Okay, well, I'm happy to stay on for a bit. Thank you all so much for attending. I'm just going to end the recording now.
Yeah, I just want to echo the thank you to especially our panelists for honestly just really being so real about it. And you're all just so wonderful. Whenever I hear you speak, I'm always inspired. So thank you so much for your time.
And for your stories. I really appreciate everyone.
And for people in the chat, like dropping their comments, even if you're listening. Thank you. And Rav, thank you there. Thank you to Rav.
No
Everything.
I really enjoyed the conversations we had. I would definitely love to, delve in a little deeper. Maybe next time, yeah.
For sure.